Many thanks for inviting us for this presentation. Actually, I thought that yesterday and the discussions were super inspiring to see the different views. And today we would like to kick off this session today by talking about how to evaluate design science and entrepreneurship. This is really work in progress, and we've been thinking about some guiding principles which could be helpful in evaluating design science and entrepreneurship. This is thinking together with René Mauer and Jan van Brocke, and this has been a fantastic project so far. Let me frame this a bit to kind of position a bit from where we're coming here. And now we, like many of you, are great enthusiasts about the design science approach. And we think that it's kind of nicely counterbalancing the mostly explanatory research that we're doing in entrepreneurship with taking a perspective on thinking of how things should be, and maybe supporting entrepreneurs and people within the entrepreneur ecosystem to how to act. And we think this is meaningful. We think we need more good entrepreneurship. There are a lot of challenges, not only through COVID-19, and we need to tackle them. And as scholars, I think we can help that with design science approach. So you see from this side here of the Zoom, there's quite some idealism and quite some passion about the design science approach. But there is, of course, also a challenge. Here is the challenge. The challenge is a review or two, or some, which is kind of an example of some of the skepticism that we sometimes see or hear when we're talking to people who are not so familiar with the design science approach. So what we sometimes hear is that people are asking, okay, Christoph, it's very nice that you're talking about design science, but is this really scientific? Is this something that we should do, or is this something just from the domain of practice? And should you touch that, or should you not? And this is one question which we often hear, actually. And the second one is a question of, now, when we're looking at these design science studies, how do we actually evaluate them? So they are different, they have a different look, different feel. How do we evaluate them when reviewing papers? So this is kind of the starting point for where we're coming from. And in this short presentation, we would like to kind of describe why we think that design science is actually a scientific approach, and outline a specific design science perspective. And based on that, we would like to describe 4 guidelines, which we hope are of any help for reviewing design science papers. So let us start by briefly outlining how we look in this paper on design science. Now, this is a specific way of looking at design science and differs a bit from the perspectives which have been outlined yesterday. So I briefly want to describe it. So we draw in this paper much on the thinking from Mary Bunge. Mary Bunge is a fantastic philosopher, my personal hero. And he has been writing about the philosophy of technology quite a bit. And this is how we look at design science in entrepreneurship. Now, looking through Bunge at entrepreneurship, we can kind of distinguish 3 approaches to entrepreneurship. This is entrepreneurship as science, entrepreneurship as design science, and then entrepreneurship as practice. Now, I just want to briefly run you a bit through these 3 approaches to show how we think entrepreneurship as design science is distinct, but also related to the 2 different approaches. So let us start by talking about entrepreneurship as science and how Bunge would kind of look at that. So in entrepreneurship as science is kind of the mainstream paradigm in entrepreneurship currently, and then we're asking typical questions like why, how, what, who, some things like that. So I've brought an example question here, which is, why is personal initiative related to entrepreneurial performance. It's a question that some of my psychology colleagues are wrestling with for the last 20 years. Now, entrepreneurship as science can be characterized by three things. So the first thing is the ultimate value for evaluating entrepreneurship as science is whether the claims that we make are true. The knowledge that we are generating in entrepreneurship as science from a Bunge perspective is explanatory knowledge. This is what Henrik has been referring to also by descriptive knowledge. And this is kind of the cause-effect logic. Now, what makes entrepreneurship as science actually scientific is the use of the scientific method according to Bunge. And in shorthand, the scientific method is that you pose a problem against a scientific body of knowledge, use some kind of scientific methods, and the results that you're getting, you're checking against this body of knowledge again. So this kind of, I mean, yes, you've been talking about it for quite some while, but this is kind of a summary of how the scientific method, according to him, could be sketched. Now, against this backdrop, we think about entrepreneurship as design science like that. So for us, entrepreneurship as design science is not tackling why or how questions, but actually how to questions. So an example question would be how to design a personal initiative training. And I've chosen this question here because this has been the question for a fantastic design science study, which has been recently published in Science, which I will refer continuously throughout this presentation to. And this is kind of a very nice study to that. So the value for evaluating entrepreneurship as design science is a bit different than entrepreneurship as science, according to Bunge, because it's evaluated essentially according to its usefulness. The type of knowledge is also a bit different. We are not developing explanatory knowledge here, but design knowledge, which is prescriptive knowledge instead of descriptive knowledge. Everett talks about teleological knowledge. So we're talking about some kind of means to achieve an end, so desired outcome. According to Bunge, this is also a scientific approach because it also uses the scientific method in which we pose a question against the body of design knowledge and then use some kind of methods which we all agreed upon. So that's kind of how he views it. Now, how is this different from practice? Now, entrepreneurship as practice also shares the value of usefulness, but it's different in that the knowledge that practice is generating is a bit different. So Bunge describes this as idiosyncratic knowledge. So basically, experienced entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs through their experience and intuition develop some kind of knowledge, and this is what we see in Berlin quite frequently, and we also invite them to UCP. It's the entrepreneurs who have built a startup and now spread some wisdom to the next generation. So this is like, in essence, entrepreneurship as a craftsmanship. So they're generating useful knowledge, but it's not necessarily scientific knowledge. Now, how are the three fields related? Entrepreneurship as design science draws on the explanatory knowledge, and it provides some kind of new cognitive understanding problems to this entrepreneurship as design science. And it contributes to practice by sharing design knowledge, so guiding actions of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship educators. And in turn, it receives a wonderful gift, which is practical problems which design scientists can wrestle with. So this is kind of how we in this paper look at design science. Now let me briefly outline 4 principles that we derive based on this view on design science. The first one is that the problem that we are posing in design science should be posed against a body of design knowledge. So how do we conceptualize design knowledge? I've just already mentioned that we conceptualize it as teleological knowledge. So we are thinking about design knowledge as at the intersection between a problem and a solution. So how to train people in order to be more entrepreneurial. And there actually, how we think about it, there are two types of design knowledge that we can contribute to and that we can pose our questions against. These are, here we put them as design principles, which is this knowledge of do personal initiative training to achieve some entrepreneurial performance results. And then the second one, and this is something that Pascal and in the discussion with Pascal has been popping up quite a bit, is the question of assessing the quality of these suggestions. So here the question is, should we actually do a personal initiative training for entrepreneurs in Western Africa? And this is not only a question of effectiveness and efficiency. So for example, in the campus paper, we have a super effective and very efficient training, but the question whether Western scholars should somehow play with the mindset of entrepreneurs in Western Africa is a question of social value. And this is kind of the second body of knowledge that we consider to be design knowledge. So bottom line here, the design science problem should be posed against this body of knowledge and should be very specific about it. So the question is, which discourse in the design knowledge sphere we're joining? Now, the second guideline which we would like to propose is that the design science project should be clearly positioned. So thinking about design knowledge as to be kind of at the intersection of problems or ends and means, we can differentiate 4 different types of design science research. And this draws really a lot on the writing by Greger and Hefner. So let me explain it a bit. So if we have a means end relationship, which we already know about, so for example, to do a training to achieve some entrepreneurial results, then it's likely that we're going to an evaluation design science research study. So we're checking whether the design knowledge is actually true and whether it's effective. Now, a second type of design science project, which we could think of, is adaptation, or we would call it adaptation. So here the problem can be rather clearly posed. So the desired outcome is kind of known, but the means are not known. So for example, when we think about how we as a firm could become more entrepreneurial, then we have a rather clear goal, but we don't necessarily know the means about how to achieve that. Kind of going along with the adaptation design science type, we have an acceptation design science project, which is, and Roberto was talking yesterday about messenger RNA and how this technology is now used to tackle novel problems. And this is what we consider acceptation problems. Now, last but not least, exploration problems are when we're exploring both the problem space and the solution space to find novel means and relationships. So this is kind of the 4 different types of design science research projects, which we kind of build a typology here for, and which we think should be clearly posed. Now, a third guiding principle refers to the method that we use to kind of explore the problem that we're posing. And here we're referring to the debate which is happening quite a bit in the information systems field, and they are asking the question whether design science is actually a purely analytical approach sometimes, or whether it's more creative. And here we suggest that it's actually really depending on the type of design science that we're doing. So if we have an evaluation problem, like the one which is tackled by Campos in the science article, we just need a very rigid analytical approach of checking that. So that there's little creativity in running a field experiment. This is slightly different when we have adaptation problems. So in this case, we are analytically deriving some some causes for a problem that is occurring, and then we're trying to find novel solutions for that problem. So if we want to become more entrepreneurial as an organization, then we're first analyzing why are we actually not so entrepreneurial, and then we're coming up with novel solutions, and this requires some kind of creativity and design. So there's some more creativity needed. So we suggest that actually whether we use analytical methods or more creative methods really depends on the problem. In both cases, it should be rigorously done. And Jan has some fantastic ideas also about how to rigorously do creative thinking. And I'm sure you can talk about it in the discussion here. Last but not least, we think that design science research should be very explicit about the contributions that it makes. And here we, again, have a little matrix. We have been talking about how design knowledge can be split into design principles and design evaluation knowledge. And we think that there is actually the possibility to contribute both theoretically and empirically to both of these types of knowledges. So if we're coming up with novel design principles, then we're theoretically contributing to design knowledge, to the design principles, or if we improve related design principles. But we can also empirically contribute to this knowledge by testing design principles or by describing artifacts. So this may be Kathy's approach of building design knowledge from case studies. So when we're describing some kind of artifacts, and then we're theorizing about whether this, why it's working, how it's working. The same thing is true for design evaluation. So here we also suggest that we can contribute both theoretically and empirically. Theoretically by, for example, developing novel criteria and norms against which we check design knowledge or design principles really. And empirically, we can explore and validate some, for example, design requirements.
I just want to check, Christoph, that this is your last slide, right?
This is my last slide.
Excellent.
Sorry, I was running a bit out of time. So the question is, so what? So we have been starting by the question of whether we actually think that it's a scientific approach. Yes, we do think so. We have been trying the Bunge and argued for that. And then we think that there are four main guiding principles which could be considered for evaluating design research. And this is pose a problem against design knowledge, and then be clear about the problem that you're tackling, use rigorous methods, and then the fourth one is to be very explicit about the theoretical or empirical contributions that you can make with that. And with that, many thanks, Henrik, for letting me run a bit over time. Now we are very happy to discuss these first ideas on how to evaluate design science and entrepreneurship. Many thanks.
Thank you. This was a nice and really well structured presentation, I think. So let me see here. We have a few things in chat already. You can fill out with additional questions if you want to. I think Edwin actually had a question that I think is relevant here. You want to ask it out loud?
Yes. I think it was answered in the last slides, but I make again, because in the first thing is the entrepreneurship as a science, as a design science, and a practice. And when you have this, when artifact creations, one in a case what is familiar to me is what the entrepreneur, when is making a entrepreneurship, they get some patterns from what is doing, and then they come with an artifact. And in this thing, it is like the creation of the artifact, a part of a practice of the entrepreneurship, but it's also kind of a design science in some. And how do you match this phenomena in your
presentation? Yeah, thanks a lot for the question, Edwin. So the question is how practice and design science is really related and how it's different, right? So we can easily think about how entrepreneurs create some artifacts or some design knowledge. And the difference that we do here is that we say, okay, look, not every practical problem or every practical artifact is actually a proper design problem or design artifact. So if, for example, George Rommel and Madis Talma, they have been thinking about an artifact to create an ecosystem strategy. So this is kind of what we would consider design science knowledge or design knowledge. So any given entrepreneur could ask themselves, how do I really, come up with a strategy, which could be a problem for them, and then they could come up with some kind of ideas about that. But this is not necessarily this practice problem. It's not necessarily a problem for science anymore, or design science, because Madis has already been tackling that. So this is kind of how we differentiate these two a bit.
May I add to this, Christoph?
Yes, please.
I like to think of it on at least two layers. I see there's the design processing, and then there's the design theorizing. Yeah, to put it in my simple words. On the one hand, we solve problems through solutions, and different types of solutions are coming out of this. There might be models, there might be methods, there might be, business model, whatever, things coming out. So that is kind of a design process. And then it's the reflection of one or multiple design processes trying to generate knowledge on more abstract level on design processes, right? This discussion has been going on. I'm not an entrepreneurship scholar, I'm information systems, but it had been going on in information systems research a lot. And it seems to, at least in our community, that this is kind of his consensus, that in the way that the running through the process and designing solutions to problems is kind of what you could in conventional research compare to data collection. It's kind of your strategy of inquiry is building stuff and evaluating it and trying to see what's coming out. And then, however, that would be kind of corresponding to a results section in the paper, but then you have a discussion section, right? In which you would try to reflect on this, engage with existing theory, engage with existing solutions, and try to advance our theoretical understanding.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Of course, Jan and René are, very welcome to jump into this discussion and support Christoph. I think Orestes, your question is kind of related to this. Do you want to ask?
Yes, yes, thank you. Christoph, we've been discussing about these topics quite a lot, and I think we converge in many things. The three aspects that you were showing can be. I gave an example basically in the G forum last year where I said, well, you have the physiologist, which is the scientist in a way, the natural scientist. You have the clinical practitioner, who is the design scientist, and you have the practitioner, the medical doctor in practice. And that's, I think, a very good analogy, which you can see here. So, and the interesting thing is that there is indeed this third role in medical research. In the United States, there's a difference between an MD and a PhD in medicine. It's two different things. And that quite well illustrates this very particular thing. I would like to stress two more aspects that have crossed my mind when I was thinking about all these things. One is that I think all these things have to do also a lot with abduction, so with purse, basically. In a very simplified manner, you can say we have these three things: cause, effect, and laws, right? And then you can say inductive thinking is you have a cause, you measure the effect, you find a law. Deductive thinking is you know the law, you give a cause, and you find the effect. And now you've got the third pairing, which is you know, in a way, the law. You want to have an effect. Now you look for the right cause. And I think that's exactly what you do in design science. You somehow, and this is also what makes it scientific, you build on a knowledge base, You know, like the medical researcher who will build on the knowledge base of DNA and mRNA and all these kind of natural science kind of things, and then try to purposefully construct something that is related to a human purpose. You very rightfully stated that. But he doesn't do it just, you know, out of the blue in a way, but I think it was Van Eycken that used the term grounded, you know, field tested and grounded. This is what he said is design science. And I think that is a very profound thing. So that's something one should look at. And then maybe as a last comment, I think there are two levels of artifacts that we need to distinguish. And let me make it in a very simple metaphor. If you talk about construction engineering, civil engineering, you have the building. Okay, that's one thing. But then you do have the scaffolds, you know, the aids that you create in order to build the building. And I think that's really two very different levels. And I think what we do very often as entrepreneurship researchers, if we do design science in entrepreneurship research, we create our main artifacts are the scaffolds, while it is the entrepreneurs that using these scaffolds build the buildings. And what I observe in the discussion about design science and entrepreneurship is that sometimes we confuse these two levels. And both are design processes, but they're different. Yeah? I think one is the role that we have as design scientists in entrepreneurship. We create the scaffolds, we create the methods, we create the approaches, the frameworks, whatever you want to have. And then there is the entrepreneurs that using these scaffolds, using these frameworks, I think Roberto said it yesterday, implicitly, I think he meant exactly that thing. He said, it's the design of the framework which matters for us, while it's the design of the building, of the company, of the business that matters for the entrepreneurs.
Couldn't agree more. It's also, we also refer to this as a class of problem and an instantiation of a problem. And usually we're always looking into classes of problems and classes of solutions. And that is these days now in information systems, we would talk about, even more general, we talk about design knowledge, right? It can be, we're creating, we're advancing design knowledge, but we're not only doing the instances as the houses. I couldn't agree more. But then if I may add also one thing, which is I find particularly fascinating at the moment, and it might relate to entrepreneurship also, is that for a very long time in information systems, at least, it was very much really also this groundedness, right? To say like, I would remember good colleagues of mine saying artifacts are not invented, they are crafted, right? So that it is really derived from knowledge, and you know. However, now I more and more come to thinking, why do we need to ground them so much, right, upfront? Or why do we need to ground them upfront? Can we not also be, and that's what kind of principle 3 was here, be more innovative, right? And then ground them ex post, right? And there needs to be a certain level of evidence, but we don't need to, because we also need kind of the innovative bit there, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And maybe the only thing is that, I mean, I would never use the word derive because it's too epistemologically loaded. Yeah, it's not about any, it's just that I would put it that way, that the scientific knowledge is just as legitimate as the practitioner knowledge and the context knowledge. And then anything goes. I think then it's really exactly what you say. Then it's up to creativity, and it's just the ex post that you need to bring it back into the realm of validity and these kind of categories.
There should be some level of evidence in a way, right? It should be, you know, but there are different sources to this evidence. I find at the moment extremely.
And they may be crazy. I mean, science is one legitimate, but there may be crazy sources, and I fully agree. We should be open to this.
This is the beginning of a beautiful conversation. But I want to have one more question before we switch over. So, Fritjof, you had a reflection on the currency and relevance of Bunge.
Yeah, and that's actually fun. I see right behind you, yours is the creativity of action. And I think that's actually, in a way, what I'm referring to. Can you maybe go back to the slide with the framework of Bunge that you opened up?
Yeah, let me.
And so what I'm trying to understand, so maybe for some context, so I'm both in organization theory, but also in design studies. And what I often miss in organization studies, like also, for example, entrepreneurship around design, is that there's like this almost exclusive look on design as design science. While if you look at design studies, we have moved quite further than just looking at design science. So one example would be design inquiry and the work on reflective practice by Donald Schoen. And so one example would be, I don't understand why you are using this framework when especially the notion of entrepreneurship as practice has moved quite a lot, I think, from what you describe here. I think the people that give themselves the label, they would have a very different idea of what practice is here. But the same
that's a good question. Can we have a chance to
Sorry.
answer it before we run out of time as well?
Yes,
that's fine.
To answer this question, so maybe starting with the last one. So I see, and I wasn't aware of that, that of course the entrepreneurship as practice kind of label evokes some kind of relationships to the strategy as practice or other as practice kind of lines of inquiry. And indeed here, this is different. So this is, we're not referring to practice theory here. This is just a way of differentiating design science from more practical entrepreneurship as we see it. Now, Fridtjof, could you pose the first question again? Because I'm not sure whether
I think what I'm trying to, sorry for being then so convoluted. What I'm trying to ask is, why would you exclude insights from design studies about design by looking at design only as design science and not including other ways of engaging with design?
I'm happy to include them also. I'm not aware of them so much. So what we try to do here is to have a clear positioning of how we see, or how we in this paper look as at entrepreneurship as design science, and would actually be very interesting to have conversations of how design community has moved on. This is just our way of, kind of positioning ourselves in a way that is grounded to develop some guiding principles. So this is kind of the reasoning behind that.
I think this in a sense relates back to some of the discussions we had yesterday as well. I'm not sure if you were with us then, Fridtjof, but Roberto and a few others also talked about how, the Simon tradition is not the only tradition to conceptualize and think about design. But I think Christoph and Jan and René, when you write a paper like this, you don't need to include all perspectives of design. Publish it and let Fridtjof write a rebuttal, and then we'll get going.
Let's do that.
So thank you, Christoph, and Dimo, I'll make you co-host. And
Henrik, can I ask? This is
sure. While Dimo posts his post,
a request from people who are more versed in design science to maybe send us a bibliography of what you think people in entrepreneurship should be reading on design. So this is just a request to people from design studies. If you can give us like a small bibliography or your favorite 3 papers or whatever.